when someone has a chronic illness, it is natural for them to have a certain need to feel validated by friends and family, by society at large, and by the medical profession. And by and large, this is what happens. But when someone has an illness like myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, it is unfortunately much rarer for the patient to receive that kind of much needed support. And this can be very difficult to cope with. In this video, I'm going to talk about some practical tips for coping with invalidation, but I'm also going to offer a big picture perspective as to how you can reframe this invalidation and actually give you a way of coping with invalidation. But first, if you are new to this channel, my name is Patrick Usher. I'm an ME-CFS patient, and this is a place where I talk about the research in an accessible way, and also where I talk about the various treatment strategies that I have employed in order to improve my condition. If that sounds of interest to you, please do like and subscribe. Now, as I mentioned, it is a basic need of the sick to have validation of what they are going through. Now, that's not to say friends and family can understand what it is you are facing in minute detail, because no one can truly understand the experience of someone else who is chronically ill or has a serious illness unless they have experienced that themselves. I cannot imagine what it's like to have multiple sclerosis, for example. But I do know that if I meet someone with MS, that they are sick, that they have a risk of getting much sicker, that it is serious, and that these facts are worthy of consideration, and I would try to be open to their explanations of what they're facing. And so that's the kind of general attitude that someone who is sick with ME-CFS, it would be reasonable for them to expect something like that from friends, family, doctors, of course, and in a general way, society at large. To use the MS example again, society in general recognizes that that is a serious illness that's worthy of special consideration, special allowances, financial and otherwise, and a certain kind of respect for what that person is going through. Now, if you are an ME-CFS or Long Covid patient or someone with POTS, and you're watching this, you've probably experienced that this has not been so much the case for you. Maybe you have certain people who support you, but you may have plenty of others who have not in ways large or small, and that's very hard to deal with. And of course, one of the great problems with ME-CFS is the CFS part. Chronic fatigue syndrome is probably the worst name in medical history. It does not capture what is going on in the illness at all. You might as well call multiple sclerosis chronic fatigue syndrome. It is that much of a misnomer for the nature of the symptoms and what it feels like to have ME-CFS. And this is because this is not really about fatigue. Yes, you get exhausted. Yes, you get completely wiped. But that's not at all an accurate description of the nature of the symptoms. What's going on in ME is a profound loss of stamina and a devastating tendency to have awful reactions to exercise. And this is happening because you're not getting enough blood into your muscles. You have low blood volume in ME, you're often 1 litre short of blood, even some people are 1.5 litres short on blood. You have microclots making the blood thick and sluggish, you have autoimmunity impeding the transfer of blood from the veins into the muscles. And so you have this state throughout the body of reduced blood perfusion. And that's what it feels like. You're not getting blood into the skin, into the muscles, into the brain, and when you're in that situation, the anaerobic threshold lowers, you try to take exercise, the body gives up, and you have this appalling reaction. And that reaction is appalling for all the same reasons, because your body is unable to recover from the exercise you've just taken, because you have the low blood volume, because you have the microclots, because you have the autoimmunity limiting blood flow. And therefore the process of recovery is truly tortured and you feel ill, and frankly it is not too far to say that when you are in that situation you can feel that actually you're dying. That's how severe the symptoms are. And so to label that as fatigue is actually horrendous, and it has done enormous damage to ME-CFS patients. It does not convey the seriousness. It has led to a situation where the powers that be do not prioritize funding because they think it's just fatigue. I use ME-CFS, I say CFS and chronic fatigue syndrome on this channel simply out of convention, but it is an absolute disservice to people who are very ill, and it has caused a lot of harm in the long run. And in fact, I saw a presentation by Anthony Komaroff from Harvard, and he was one of the people back, I believe, in the 1990s who decided to call this chronic fatigue syndrome, and he said in that presentation that he regrets that term. However, the damage is done, and it's not just that it has led to a lack of funding and advancements for people who are sick in the way that's needed, but it has also led to a lack of emotional support, practical support for the very ill because of this direly inappropriate name. It doesn't matter, it seems, that a study has shown that patients with severe ME have worse quality of life than those with rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, even people who are undergoing chemotherapy. And then when it comes to the medical profession, there developed very early on a dogmatic groupthink in relation to ME-CFS. See, the problem is that standard tests are not able to pick up the problems. That doesn't mean that there are not tests that can pick up the problems. There are. You have tests that pick up microclotting. You have ways to pick up microclotting. You have tests that pick up low blood volume, that pick up the autoimmunity, that pick up all kinds of things, actually, when you delve into the research into ME-CFS. And Stanford even found a potential biomarker. But if you just use the standard tests, you're not going to find anything. You may see hints, but you're not going to get what's really going on. And that's a limitation of the tests that are being used. If you ask the wrong questions, you'll get the wrong answers. And so for all this time, doctors have been asking the wrong questions when they run tests. Therefore, they concluded there's nothing wrong. These people are just hypochondriacal. That actually all the people, millions of people worldwide, who all complain of devastating reactions to exercise, are all simultaneously engaging in a hypochondriacal pact. That is actually considered a feasible notion for the medical profession, those who do not have an open mind, a scientific mind, towards the problem of ME-CFS. There's an excellent article by Dr. William Weir, who is an expert on ME-CFS, and the article is called ME-CFS Past, Present and Future, and in that piece he goes into the history of groupthink in medicine in relation to conditions in general, and also in relation to ME-CFS. What he describes in that article is that whenever medicine has encountered symptoms that it does not yet understand, it goes to Freud, it goes to a psychological interpretation. There was a time when multiple sclerosis was viewed as a product of female hysteria. There was a time when Parkinson's was viewed as a lack of sufficient masturbation, or perhaps it was too much masturbation. I can't remember what it was, but that was literally the view. And then they found what was really going on. The same tortured process has happened with ME-CFS. Now, that is a very depressing perspective. It is unfortunately the situation. It is changing. There are doctors who are open. There's great research that's happening, and Long Covid has shifted the narrative to an extent. But we really need to think about how to deal with this. And, I have found this dynamic extremely difficult to deal with, and it leads to being very isolated. And in other videos, I will talk about my experience with doctors and the medical profession, and so on. But ultimately, the thing that's helped me the most is to reframe kind of invalidation and to see it as something that happens far beyond just the question of ME-CFS, by which I mean that in every age there are people in society whose suffering goes unnoticed and to which society is basically blind. So there have always been groups that are dismissed, that are not cared about, who are considered a nuisance. Whether it might be the homeless, whether it might be people with other illnesses, psychiatric or medical, whether it might be specific minority groups, whatever it is, that is a dynamic that happens at a big picture level. And every generation has its people who come along and who dare greatly in order to try and change the situation. And so actually, when we as ME-CFS patients experience this, life is asking us to do something about that. It's asking us to recognise that this kind of invalidation, it's a wrong, it's something that needs to be corrected, but this is a story that repeats over and over with the human species. And so life is asking us to play our part in order to try and change the situation, to be brave and to speak up. And that is how I have come to view this problem. Because I always expected if I got ill, I'd never face this kind of constant wall of ignorance, blaming the victim, silence a lot of the time. I never thought that would be what I would face. But now I see that plenty of people have faced that in all kinds of different contexts. And so that, I think, is the core perspective that allows you to deal with this dynamic. This very much ties in with someone like Viktor Frankl and his book Man's Search for Meaning. His essential point is, life is asking each individual person, given the circumstances that life has thrown at them, it's asking them to find their individual meaning. And for me, when you have ME-CFS, that individual meaning must include trying to change with dignity. Not being a victim, actually. I mean, in many ways, ME-CFS patients are victims. But to speak with courage and dignity and to take action in order to try and change the situation so that other ME-CFS patients in future, as well as yourself in future, can have a better life. So that's a very general perspective. Now I'm going to talk about some more specific examples of the kinds of people that you might encounter in relation to this. People who might invalidate you, because they tend to fall, at least in my experience, into different groups. Now, the first group is not actually setting out to invalidate you. They just find it hard to understand what you're facing. And these people are actually well-intentioned. They do care about you. They're often your friends, or they're people you meet who are open-minded about ME-CFS. But they just perhaps use the wrong words. They fall into that trap of thinking that this is about fatigue, or being tired, or being exhausted. Now, I find this really irritating, right? If someone says to me, how's your energy today? Or if I'm feeling ill and they're like, if you're tired, rest up. As I'm lying there, on the way out, as it seems. I find that annoying. But I know that they're not meaning it, right? They're not actually setting out to minimize my situation. They've just picked up that this is about chronic fatigue, and they think that's the case. And they're trying to understand it, they're trying to have a frame of reference, and so they use those kinds of words. When someone is well-meaning like that, it's very important not to bite the hand that feeds you, or to be a shit to someone who's actually has a kindly disposition. So they've got it wrong. Don't say anything, just say thank you. When you are feeling better and you're talking to them, you can bring in a very neutral way, some of the research into ME-CFS. Talk about what it is, it's, low blood volume happens. Tell them about that. But don't talk ad nauseum about it. Just, mention one part in a conversation. Just say, hey, this is part of what happens, and just tell them about what the condition is really like. But without bringing it back to anything they've ever said to you. Because those people are very open and they want to understand. And I think sometimes some people with ME, they're so fed up of being, misunderstood that they kind of take on any instance of misunderstanding. And if someone is well-intentioned, I don't think that's the way to go about it. So the second group of people who tend to invalidate are those whom I would say believe the doctor is God. They believe the expert's word is 100% correct in all cases. And these people, they may be good people, but they have a limited worldview. And that worldview means that when it comes to medical matters, only what the doctor says is true. And so you may go to someone like this, they may be a family member, you may be really needing their support, and you try and talk about ME, but because they have lodged in their head that ME is that strange illness that doesn't really exist, where nothing's really wrong, and it's just the hypochondriacs kind of thing, they shut down any attempt to talk about it, and they will just say, has a doctor told you that? And they'll make quite clear that support depends upon the doctor's word, otherwise, who cares, kind of thing. And this is very hard to deal with. I've had personal experience of this, and it was extremely painful, and I was left in a very isolated situation as a result. this is a problem where, these people cannot understand that they're putting you in a catch-22, because the 99.9% of doctors are not taught any of the research into ME-CFS. They're not taught about the biomedical problems. They're not taught about the work that goes on at Stanford or Harvard. They don't even know it's happening. And as a result, if it depends upon getting the word of the expert, then you're never going to get the family support. You're left isolated. It's a very, very difficult position to be put into. And so I call this group the invalidation by default group, because there's nothing much you can do about it. And it can be really painful, because often you have good relationships with such people. It's just that they have a limited worldview in this particular area. And so I'm not really sure what's the best answer here. Maybe you have an answer for people who fall into this category. Ultimately, I feel like, in a very kind of gentle but firm way, actually raising awareness about the biomedical research with such people and saying, look, can I have your support and interest in what I'm facing? And really to actually speak very directly to the nature of the problem. If they get very awkward and it's clear that actually they just radically do not believe you, you can kind of say, well, we'll come back to that relationship later. We need to kind of redraw the boundaries, because I can't seek support in the way that I need. But by appealing to the good nature of someone in a very neutral way, it may well bring that out, or not, as the case may be. And finally, there are people who are just downright shits. These are people who often have personality disorders, like narcissistic or whatever, and when they see someone who is down, they love nothing more than to kick them. These people love to blame the victim, and so they will be outright unpleasant. I remember a time where someone was coming over to visit my father, and he was really unpleasant. I went down to sit with him to say hello, and all he could do was laugh at me for half an hour, interspersed with statements like, oh, you look so well, bet you're going to go and play some sport. Sorry you don't feel well, but you look great. And he just kept laughing. And he went like that on and on. And that's called being a total shit. I've had plenty of horrible comments. I've had people saying that they think I just have a screw loose. And, it's been really difficult. And that can come from people that I care about. You're just depressed. You're just this, you're just that. I've had a lot of these things. I've come to expect them, actually, from a certain kind of person. So I almost find them funny at this stage. But the thing about people like that is it is all about them. They are very damaged, very broken, and they feel the need to bully others in order to feel better about themselves. And sometimes it's not just that, sometimes they're actually just projecting. So a lot of these people are very neurotic. They haven't accepted that about themselves, and so they think that ME patients are neurotic, so they just project onto you. Now, with these people, there is no point in trying to change their mind. They are lost anyway. These people, when they are confronted, just become more and more aggressive. They have no capacity, or very limited capacity, for self-reflection. And so the thing to remember with these kinds of people is their opinion worth anything anyway? Think about the kind of values these people have. What difference does it really make if you can convince them of the validity of ME-CFS as an illness? The opinion of these people is worth very little. I think when you are confronted with such people, the best thing is either to make a hasty exit, saying nothing and just look after yourself, or you can have a little bit of fun. There's a technique from logotherapy, which is Viktor Frankl's therapy. I can't remember the name of the technique at the moment, but it's where if someone is being very unpleasant to you, you kind of actually have a little game with it. You take what they're saying, you pretend to agree with it, and you magnify it to a kind of to epic proportions, and it can be quite fun. So to give you an example, if someone were to say, ME patients, they're just the hypochondriacs, aren't they? They're just there's nothing really wrong with them. Nothing's ever been found. They're just all making it up. It's in their head, right? So someone says that to you, and they're wanting to hurt you, right? You can say, "Gosh, that's a fascinating theory. That is actually one of the most well thought out perspectives. It has blown my mind. That has blown my mind, what you've just said." listen, have you thought about writing an article arguing that point? Because I think the Lancet will be very interested in that. Now, hang on a second. I'm just worried about one thing, though. You, of course, know about the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone suppression, the paradox, the RAS paradox in the illness, which drives the hypovolemia. The ME patients often having a litre less blood than normal. Now, I'm just trying to think, how could the hypochondriasis lead to the RAS suppression and the resulting hypovolemia? Not to mention the microvascular leakage that occurs that leads to the transfer of fluid from the active circulation into the interstitial space, as found by Professor Klaus Wirth. That thought occurs to me. Or perhaps the biomarker that was found by Stanford, where the exposure of cells to ME-CFS patients to hypertonic saline solutions was leading to an unusually exacerbated stressful response at a cellular level. I'm just trying to think. Now, tell me, if you were using this theory of hypochondriasis, how would you explain those particular research findings? And then you leave, or something like that. But the point is, these people are lost. There's nothing you can do about it. But in general, this is a perspective that I have developed about invalidation. It is calling us, this problem, at a societal medical level, it is calling us as ME-CFS patients to dare bravely and to actually play our part in trying to change this situation so that one day, when random people hear about ME, they know it's actually a serious illness and that it's something that deserves societal and medical due consideration. And that's something that we all have a role to play in, to make the suffering of the invisible visible. So leave your experience down below with invalidation. What kind of techniques or perspectives have you developed in order to cope with it? And I look forward to hearing from you in the comments below.